Developer speed. It's about self-serve access to infrastructure that helps teams to build, run, and govern APIs consistently. Kong gives you the foundation to do just that. We power the world's top platform engineering teams so they can innovate faster and scale smarter. With self-serve gateway infrastructure, class-leading automation, and out-of-the-box auth and observability tooling, it's a single pane of glass for your API platform team. Cut complexity and expand your roadmap with Kong.
All right. I think we're live. All right, there you are, Michael. What's up, Mike?
How's it going?
It's going. You know, living the dream. How are you?
Doing all right. A little sleepy, to be honest, but we're pulling through.
We'll pull through indeed. So I know it looks like we've got some folks who have already joined. I'm looking at LinkedIn on my other screen at the same time. The weird thing about streaming live to LinkedIn is there's almost always a delay. So I'm saying something probably 10, 20 seconds before you're hearing it. That's fine. But the weird part is if you all ask questions, when we answer them, we'll seem like it's a little off in the presentation. Because by the way, you should put questions in the comments. If you're on LinkedIn, just go direct to the comments. We'll be monitoring them there. And then of course, this will stay in your feed for a while. So if you're watching this live stream, but not live because you're hearing this or seeing this in your feed later on, still put questions in the comments. We'll be monitoring the comments and we will we'll address them when we get to them. We'll be keeping an eye on it for the next few days because oftentimes we'll see questions come on in for about 2-3 days or so. Okay, with that, what are we talking about? You'll see the chapter marker, API platform requirements. This stream is supposed to be the culmination of our Everything You Need in API Platform in Konnect series. I say supposed to be because there were 2 more videos we were supposed to publish. For a variety of reasons, we didn't get to it. Mostly just time with people out. Well, and I was going to post one of them this morning, but it was too long. There was a 15-minute
recording it. You said it was fine.
It was. I thought so. I didn't know that LinkedIn had a 15-minute limit. So it's unfortunate, but we'll be sharing them after this. I'll be chopping up the long one into multiple ones. I'll share it on LinkedIn after so you all can see that one's on automation APIOps. And then we have another cool one on API discovery that will come slightly after this as well. So the content will be there. It's just slightly out of order. So apologies in advance. But anyways, I know we like to try and get you all out of here in like 30 or 40 minutes. So I won't keep blabbering and we'll get to the topic. Once again, everything you need in API platform in Konnect. So first, Mike and I, he's going to build an API platform basically from scratch using Konnect. But first, we're going to talk about like what we mean by this. Right? What is an API platform? That's the big question to answer first. And then what's really required as you know, a platform builder, are trying to build an API platform at your organization. So as we are like to do, I will share a Miro board and we'll run through it. So the way that we view API platform here at Kong, we see it sort of, there's like two dimensions, there's two sort of axes, right, that the API platform relies on. The first is what I call the vertical axis, right? This is what I call here: build, run, discover, govern. If you think about something like the API lifecycle, these four high-level categories sort of absorb all the other subsets and stages in the lifecycle. So we can think about this vertical layer here as the full lifecycle, and I'll turn it around. Nice. Make it a little bit bigger. Cool. Okay, so that's one. That's what I call the vertical axis, right? Setting up the capabilities at your organization to build, run, discover, and govern the various APIs in your organization. But at Kong, specifically with Konnect, we don't view the API platform through the lens of just the traditional API, right? We are thinking about more than just that. The magic of Konnect, Michael will reference this, showcase some of it in the solution, is this multi-runtime, multi-protocol approach that we have. So when we're thinking about the API platform, once again, we're thinking about a lot more than just your traditional REST API, for example. Right? We're thinking about what are all the other various services that you've in digital assets, entities in your organization that could be properly platformed and then exposed and published as APIs, right, via the platform. So this is this horizontal layer, right? So we'll make.
Hey, Alex, can you boost the Miro a little bit? Folks are having a hard time seeing. Got a shout.
Is it too small? Oh, it's probably because, yeah, it looks like Restream is making it a little tiny. So I'll zoom in. This will be the best that I can get here. Hopefully that's better. Anyway, so vertical layer, horizontal layer. Ideally, when you're thinking about a platform, you're thinking about building a self-service federated platform that gives your organization, the engineers in your org, everything they need to build, run, discover, and govern your traditional APIs, AI. So think LLMs, MCP servers, etc. Your event streaming, we just launched it in Gateway. That's one of the reasons why we didn't publish all the content originally. We got preoccupied with this. But your event streaming resources, think something like real-time data and Kafka. And of course, your microservices estate. Now, when we think about the platform that you can build with Konnect, there are basically three ways you can roll this out. Your organization, you can drive adoption. We think of it, one, as the vertical layer. So maybe you just start with the traditional API, right? So you implement a platform that gives your organization, the engineers, everything you need to build, run, discover, govern their traditional APIs. Or maybe you're an eventing team, a data owner, EDA architect. You go vertical here on the event side. Same with AI. So that's one way. The other way to adopt the platform is what we call the horizontal way. So maybe you would just look at something like a developer portal or a service catalog and just prioritize this horizontal layer. Do the same thing with something like Insomnia on the build side, for example. But eventually, where we see most organizations going who have these robust, ambitious API platform initiatives, they're thinking about what I call the diagonal approach, where you're enabling your entire organization, the engineering teams in the org, with all the tooling, services, processes necessary to build, run, discover, and govern your traditional APIs, your LLMs and AI services, your events, and your entire microservices estate in a single, consolidated, but federated API platform. And that hits on the last thing that I want to discuss. There really are I'd say three big requirements, right? You can't just go collect tooling, right? You can't just put technology somewhere and just call it a platform. There are some very important principles that we believe are necessary for an API platform to reach its full potential. The first, approaching it with a self-serve mentality. All the various services, processes, functionality that you enable in a platform like this should be made self-service available to the engineers in your organization. Second, it's very important that you federate access, right, and can control access, but still enable self-service access across various areas of the business, different lines of business, different product teams, however you want to separate things. Different teams, different engineers in the business need to be able to go somewhere and be able to set up infrastructure for themselves, right, in a way that's still governed. And this is the third thing, thinking about central platform governance specifically through the lens of automation. If you're going to set up a self-service platform that's going to allow teams to go fast and self-serve infrastructure, self-serve APIs, you want to make sure that best practices are always enforced, right? Just think about something like security. You want to be sure that the proper security mechanisms are always enforced every single time somebody is exposing an API, whether that's to an internal or an external user. There are security mechanisms that need to be in place. You can implement this through a proper, what I call governance as code strategy, through something like APIOps, infrastructure as code. Once again, setting up automated guardrails around your platform. This is a crucial ingredient. So with that, Michael, I don't know if you would add anything to this. I want to make sure you have time to run through your demo, but is there anything that you think we've missed so far in this portrayal of the platform?
No, I'll give you an A+ there. That was a pretty solid overview, and for you, actually pretty succinct there. So I think.
All right, I'll take it. I'm practicing. Trying my best.
And also selfishly want to maximize demo time here. So good to transition over.
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. So we're going to try to get through the entire kind of API lifecycle platform governance here, somewhere in the realm of 20 to 30 minutes. So I'm going to task Alex with keeping me on track here, making sure I don't miss any kind of core steps. But yeah, if you guys have any questions while I'm going through, we can always adjust. We can back up and provide more detail on things. But we're going to keep this pretty high level on each step so we can actually have time to show all the steps. And then remember from earlier videos on the series Alex and I have done, we have content that goes into much more detail on each of these sections if any of this kind of piques your curiosity or you want to dive in deeper.
Yep.
All right. So with that, I'll go ahead and pull up my screen now. All right. You got the inception view there, Alex?
I do.
Cool. All right, so we're actually not going to start in Konnect because we're going to start in the build stage, and we're actually going to start in Insomnia today. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this run through of starting all the way with just a basic open API specification to getting this proxied and governed inside of Konnect and seeing what that whole process looks like. So this is the API we're going to be working with mostly today. Super basic service here, this payments processing service, and it's just got 2 endpoints. Allows you to create a payment here, and then you can get the status of a payment by passing its ID through to this other endpoint that we have. Now, inside of Insomnia, you can actually design these specs from the ground up, so we can actually apply different linting rules. Right now, we're just using the default Open API spec linting rules, and we can see here everything is passing. So from this, you can actually generate a collection, which I've already done, which is going to set up some requests for us that we can actually start hitting this API. And it's just utilizing this backend service here, so let's send a couple of requests through. And that's working as we'd expect. And we can also come here, pass in a JSON body to actually create some payments through this post request. Now, both of these are working as expected. And of course, if you had a more complex API, you can group these all into different collections. And there's also a collection runner inside Insomnia. And this is really cool and powerful because you can do different iterations where you upload dynamic data. So you can check for a bunch of different edge cases, especially if these APIs are in active development. But showing that looks like, if we go ahead and run this collection, we can see we have some basic tests on each of these endpoints, just checking for a 200 status and checking to make sure the response is a JSON object. So again, this is where we're starting. There's nothing inside of Kong right now related to this particular API. We basically just have a spec. And of course, we have some kind of backend server that's actually fielding the requests to this particular API. So before we add this Konnect, let's go hop over to Konnect now and just take a look at the current state here. So hopefully if you've seen some of our prior videos or you just have hands-on experience with Kong in general, you're somewhat familiar with this UI. But I have a bunch of different control planes here, and we're mostly going to be focused down here at these bottom 3 control planes. So we have a dedicated control plane for the payments team. That's where we're going to be spending the majority of our time. We can also see that the platform team has a dedicated control plane. And then we have this concept of a control plane group, which is called full platform demo here. So again, we went into more details when we did our entire video on federated API management inside of Kong. But the idea is here is each team or business unit or environment, however you would like to structure things that's flexible here, is going to have their own control plane with their own RBAC controls and permissions about who can, basically do all the CRUD, create, read, update, and delete inside of that particular control plane. And you can roll up 2 or more control planes inside of a control plane group. And that allows you to have shared infrastructure and all that config can be deployed there while still having segregation between the teams. So we'll get into more details on what that looks like and how the gateway is actually deployed. But to start things off, let's take a look at the payments team control plane. So not a ton going on here. We actually already do have one service deployed. So we can see it's tagged here as part of the payments team. But this is a totally separate service. What we're looking at in Insomnia, if we go back real quick, is this is our processing service. And inside of Kong, we can see we're already proxying a status service here. And again, that's identified with these tags, which do have some importance, which I'll show here in just a sec. There's just one route to access this particular service. And we have a couple plugins. We have some basic authentication and rate limiting set on this. So now what we want to do is take our spec and somehow get this inside of Konnect so we can start applying things like these policies that we see here. So to do that, I'm actually just going to do this through a couple CLI commands that I'll walk us through. So I'm just going to copy and paste these over. But the first thing I want to do is actually grab that spec that's inside Insomnia. So I'm going to use what's called the INSO CLI, which is tied to Insomnia. And I'm going to go ahead and export that Open API spec. Now, next thing I need to do, because again, that's just a standard Open API spec, is actually translate that into Kong specific configuration. Let's go ahead and run another det command here. And you can see Open API to Kong. So we're just going to pass in that spec, and then we're going to generate a deck file. So with that done, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to show this payments deck file I just generated. And then let's go ahead and hide a few things so you can see it a bit better. But this is generated directly from the spec inside of Insomnia. You can see here, it's gave us the name of the service, and then it's also generated 2 routes for us based off of those 2 endpoints inside of the specification itself. So this is some of the basics, again, what's just inside the spec, but I actually want to patch this with a few additional things. So if you've used deck before, you can target different control planes. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that this is targeting the payments team control plane inside of my Konnect org. And the second thing I want to do is I want to make sure I don't overwrite or modify or change any of the existing services in there that belong to other subteams. So what I'm going to do is I've already set up this, but I have a patch file that is going to add in both those tags and the control plane. So you'll see this change in real time when I run this command. And perfect. We have tags, so it's part of the larger payments team, but it's also everything in here is specific to the sub team that works on this processing service. And we can also see now it is targeting the control plane inside of Konnect. So now that that's all good to go, I'm going to go ahead and actually push these changes to my control plane. And we can see an overview of the changes that occurred. And we see we created 3 new objects, the service itself and the 2 associated routes there. So let's go jump back to Konnect now. I'll refresh the page. And boom, just like that, our Open API specification has now been translated into Kong specific configuration. We can see here now we have an additional service in here and additional routes. So again, just a basic proxy, but now this is up and running behind the Kong gateway. So just to show a couple requests here, I'm going to show how this is actually deployed now. So how the gateway is actually deployed, to clarify here. So again, we have this full platform demo, which is a control plane group. So let's open this up. We can see that there's 2 control plane members here. We have the payments team, which we were just looking at, and we have the platform team control plane, which we'll look at in just a little bit here. But both of their configurations are deployed to shared infrastructure. So there's just one data plane deployed. I'm just running this locally on Docker. So if I open up Docker desktop here, you can see I have a gateway running and it's opened on port 8000. So because, again, this payments team control plane is part of the larger group, all that configuration that I just added and pushed through deck should now be live on that gateway. To go ahead and test that theory, let's go back to Insomnia. Let's go back to our request. Now, again, previously we were directly hitting the backend API or service, but now I want to try going through the gateway and utilize the proxy. So I'm going to switch which environment I'm working in, and I have another proxied environment. And you can see that this variable is now updated. And instead of going directly to the backend API, I'm going to go to my gateway that's running locally, which will forward that request to the backend service. So if everything's working, okay, great. Getting 200s here. Let's check our other endpoint. Getting 200s here. Now, this is just a simple proxy. Obviously, the gateway is adding an extra hop in here, but we haven't applied any kind of logic. Yes, we're going to get things like observability out of the box, which we'll look at some analytics details here in just a moment. But we don't have any kind of security or additional logic that we'd want to enforce through policies yet. So we're going to jump back to Konnect now and do that manually. So let's take a look at the routes that we just created. So we have this get payment status route, again, from our original Open API spec. And, oh, I'm actually still inside of the control plane group. Let's go back to the payments team control plane. These control plane groups are read only. And so all the configuration comes from the underlying members. So if I actually want to make a change to something inside of the payments team control plane, I need to have permissions to go inside this control plane and then go make the changes. So let's now look at this get payment route. Let's go to plugins and let's go ahead and add a new plugin here. We'll do everybody's favorite here just to start. Let's go add some rate limiting in. We'll do the rate limiting advanced plugin. We can see it's automatically applied to the route that I selected. And we're just going to do something super basic. Sliding window, we'll say 5 requests every 10 seconds here. And leave the default basically to set the rate limit key based on consumer. So for example, if Alex and I both were sending requests to this API, it would generate a different rate limit key behind the scenes, and we'd both have our own separate limits of 5 requests per 10 seconds. So go ahead and save that. And then let's go ahead and for creating a payment, let's go ahead and require some kind of authentication. So let's go ahead and add key authentication here, and we'll leave the defaults, and the key needs to be named API key here. So let's go ahead and save that. Now those plugins are live. So once again, let's go back to our API testing and debugging tool, which of course is Insomnia. Let's go ahead and disable that. And let's try to hit the same endpoint we were hitting where we're just trying to get payment status. It doesn't appear to be any changes, but of course, if I send enough requests here, eventually after 5 requests, I'm going to hit my 429, and that is our rate limit kicking in. You can also see now that one of those tests is failing because the response status is no longer 200. Now, if I switch over to actually creating a payment, and auth is disabled right now, so just to make that clear, switch that to none, and let's go ahead and send a request now. And just like we hoped, we get a 401 unauthorized because, of course, I have not provided any kind of key. So when it comes to actually generating different authentication keys here, there's really, broadly speaking, 2 types of options. One, which we'll look at in a bit more detail in just a bit here, is, of course, I could look to expose this API to the developer portal and enable some kind of self-service subscription or access where people could request access to this API, and then we can generate the token or the key for them. But for now, the first more simple example is I'm actually going to create a consumer inside of Kong and just generate the key for them. So to do that, let's go ahead and create our first consumer inside this control plane. We'll go ahead and call this one, let's call out the greatest actor of all time. Let's create a Nick Cage customer. He'd be a cool customer to have, but not a customer, of course.
I could say this is the first time you've used Nick Cage as your dummy consumer.
I keep it pretty original, but we got to bring in Nick Cage whenever we can. So let's go ahead and save that guy. So we now have Nick Cage as a consumer, unfortunately not a customer, but maybe one day. And now we need to generate some credentials for him. And since we're using the key authentication plugin, let's go ahead and create a key auth credential. Now, if you just save this, we'll generate a unique key for you, but I'm going to keep it very simple. And we're just going to go ahead and call this one secret key. So now everybody can see Nick Cage's key, but that's fine for demo purposes. And we can see that that has been created here, and I can go ahead and copy that key at any time. So let's return to Insomnia. Again, we're still getting 401s. But let's go ahead and add some auth now. So when we set up the plugin, remember we set the header to API key, and then I'm just going to go ahead and paste that key in. And if I did everything correctly, all right, Nick Cage does indeed have access now. And just to show you, if I modify this key somewhat, and I try to send it again, we're back to a 401. If I go ahead and fix that, bring it back to secret key 200. Now, of course, inside Insomnia, I'm manually inputting all these values, but it's definitely worth calling out here. If we look at Insomnia, go to some of the preferences here, is recently with 11, we now support basically cloud providers. So if you want to store your secrets in AWS, GCP, Azure, HashiCorp, so on, and link them inside of here Insomnia, so you can have basically remote secrets management and don't want everything, just typed in plain text, even though it is obscured here, but you don't want that managed on an individual developer to developer basis. We do support linking with other basically vaults and cloud credential solutions. Okay, so that's all working now. We do have our basic policies in place, but we've been sending a decent amount of requests through. So the next thing we want to touch on that is a core part of any platform is, of course, having some type of analytics or observability. So let's go back to Konnect once more, and let's take a look at what we have for built-in analytics. Now, again, this is something we've done much more detailed videos on, but when it comes to observability, broadly speaking, there's 3 pillars. You have your metrics, which is high-level stuff, more like what we're seeing right here. You have your logs for more detail in the world of APIs on individual requests. And then you have traces, which is going to give you a ton of details. And we also support built into the product through active tracing. And that's going to give you details on latency down to the policy level. You can see upstream latency versus gateway latency. And it's really good for kind of more complex debugging scenarios. But just looking at high-level metrics here, of course, at any point, I can come and build different stuff out here in the Explorer. What kind of time do I want to group things by? We have different types of bar charts we can do here. And you can also have pre-built stuff. So that's what the reports are. So I've already pre-built a dashboard here we can take a look at. And I can see here basically the time frame this report's set up for. And it's basically breaking in all the requests that come to the gateway by their status code. Now, if I want to modify this somewhat, that's easy to do. I can come here. Maybe I want to group by status code. And let's also go ahead and group by route. And so as we'd expect, the 401s are going to that create payment endpoint because that's where we put the key off. And before I'd actually granted the key to the consumer inside Insomnia, we got a couple 401s. And I can see the 200s and also the 429s from the rate limiting policy. So again, this is just high level analytics, but it allows you to explore. You can dive deeper. You can look at much older data so you can see trends that's happening for your different APIs. Now, additionally, we support, like I mentioned, is logging. I'll go ahead and discard those changes down to the individual request level. So I can see all these. I can see the consumer made the call. If there's no consumer, it's just identified by IP address because we don't have any authentication to identify them. And I can see things like headers in both the request and the response. And then again, we won't really have time to cover it today, but we also support much deeper active tracing where you can run these deep tracing sessions and basically see the whole life cycle of each of these individual requests. And again, seeing kind of like individual latency per policy, which can be super powerful. Now, the next thing I want to do is make sure we talk at least a little bit about RBAC permissions. So Alex, I don't want you sitting idly over there for too long. So we're going to bring you into this demo now for a bit. And just to show folks before you share your screen, inside of my organization here, I have added Alex in here and I've added to him team. And a team is nothing more than a collection of roles. And so we put him in the analytics viewer team. And so this is the only permissions I've granted Alex is I made him an analytics viewer. So Alex, if you want to share your screen now, let's see what your UI is actually looking like.
Let's see if I share Konnect. I have no permission to access any resource outside of analytics.
Very nice. For a second there, I thought the demo gods were turning on us, but it's
Nope.
working as expected.
No, we're in.
All right. So that is your role, Alex. I think you played it well, but I'm going to go ahead and take back the screen sharing now.
Well, why can't I create a report?
Because you're only a viewer, so you only have read permissions on stuff I set up for you. I think having create permissions for you would probably be a little bit too much power.
All right. Well, fine. Whatever you say.
Steal it back and seeing some of the comments in. Appreciate the positivity coming there from Andrew Palmer. And we'll dive back into the demo. All right. So we covered built-in analytics inside of Konnect. But of course, a lot of you are probably saying, hey, I already had some kind of third-party observability or sim tooling or whatever that might be, anything from a Datadog to a Splunk, or maybe you want to push out traces to an OTel collector. So of course, that's all supported inside of Konnect 2, and we can integrate with all these third-party tools. So the way we're going to show that now is through a little bit of top-down governance through the platform team. So if you remember earlier, looking at these control planes, we see we have this platform team control plane. So let's take a look here. So totally separate team, again, totally different RBAC controls over who can actually access this control plane. And they don't actually have any services deployed, but they deployed a global plugin here. Now, for the simplicity of this demo, this is just a file logging plugin. And all we're doing here is going to dump to this local temporary folder and basically log each of the API requests coming through. But obviously, there's other plugins for integrating with those third-party observability providers. So with that, though, because this platform team is a part of the overall control plane group, if we go back to the full platform demo here, we go to plugins, we see that that file log is included here, which means it applies to all services inside of the larger control plane group. So again, this is kind of a top-down governance. And to show that, I'm just going to go into Docker desktop here real quick. I'm going to open up my container. Let's go ahead and look for that file. Perfect. We see Kong logs there. Let's open that guy up. And we can see all the requests that have been coming through the gateway because of that plugin. Again, regardless of which service it was on the payments team or if we had other control planes involved as well, are all getting logged here. So again, we're taking this top-down approach where the platform team is setting up observability for their entire organization, or at least inside of this control plane group. So that's one approach here to governance. And it works well for things like observability, but not everything you want to be as top-down about. There's some things where maybe you want to have guidelines or guardrails set up, but you still want to have basically each of your teams having some level of independence to implement that how they best see fit. So maybe you want to enforce authentication across your organization, but you don't necessarily want to set that up for all the individual teams inside of your organization. So to do that, we're going to now bring in service catalog into the fold here. So again, another one we have a lot more details on if you're not familiar, but the basic idea of service catalog is to really get at 360 observability into the health of a service or an API is you need to bring in different integrations. So of course, we're going to support all the Konnect integrations out of the box, But maybe we want data coming in again from that third-party observability tooling. Maybe you're using Datadog, or we want to look at GitHub and look at things like pull requests and issues. There's a lot of different data we want to bring in for me to determine whether or not I consider that service healthy. So that's done through these integrations. And once you set these up, these integrations bring in different resources. And then so whoever is managing this, again, often the platform team or maybe individual services teams as well, is they can group these resources from these different integrations into collections, which are called services. So if we look at our payment service here, this is a relatively basic one. Basically, it's just pulling in the two different microservices we're looking at. So the status service was the one that was pre-existing. The process service is the one that we added in manually today when I was doing those different deck commands. I can pull in other stuff. Again, like I can associate analytics reports with this. And of course, if I started pulling in things like the underlying GitHub repos and maybe things like PagerDuty, I can start getting a lot more details here. But the way we can actually go about governing these services and making sure they're up to basically the spec that we want, or what we consider for a healthy, well-performing services, is through what's called scorecards. So just showing what this looks like, if I were to generate a scorecard, we have different built-in templates. Eventually, we will allow users to create their own custom scorecards. But I can see a lot of different things here. So if I want to look at, I don't know, service maturity here, and I integrate with PagerDuty, I can see the on-call engineer, things like response times. I can set what limits I think of how many open PRs they should be and how long they should be open. Same thing with issues. I can evaluate CI/CD pipelines. So there's a lot of customization involved in here, again, defining what you consider a healthy service for all the teams within your organization. And then once you already have a scorecard built, so I have this one for service documentation, I can apply it to one or many or all the services. So I have them all applied here. And no surprise here, Alex is the owner of the payment service, and he is.
You always do this on every demo. Now, last time you and I both had failing scores, and I see now that we had to make some adjustments. Immediately, you fixed this. Classic.
Well, I'm playing on top. You clearly haven't been checking in here very much.
Yeah. Well, to divert the conversation for a minute away from my failure, we do have one question.
Yeah.
So for RBAC, do you support federated controls with Azure AD, or identity providers, or do groups need to be managed within the Konnect UI?
No, great question. Yeah, so we can definitely do mapping from other identity providers. So you can integrate over SAML or OpenID Connect, and then you can map that to basically RBAC concepts based on existing roles of users inside of Konnect. So that's 100% supported.
Cool. Excellent.
Cool. All right, back to your failing service. So we can add here, again, for service documentation, it looks like Alex has no docs on his service. He has no specs. And so, of course, it's going to fail any linting rules we might have set up for that spec because there is no spec. So just showing real quick how this could be implemented. If I go back to the payment service and I go add some documentation. Now, this could be pulled in from other integrations as well, but I'm going to go ahead and just add an empty document. I'm going to give Alex a README here, just as a base document. And then we'll just go ahead and put something super simple in here. This supports Markdown, so my first doc here. And we'll go ahead and save that. So again, not the best documentation, but just showing the ability to meet what these high-level compliance rules are. Now, scorecards by default right now are set to refresh every 15 minutes on their own in the background, but I can force a refresh here. We'll support manually refreshing before this goes GA, just by editing and saving. And we'll see these are now reevaluating based on the criteria. So we'll come back and check this and see if Alex's service improves. But while that's going on, let's assume that we got Alex's service fully up to compliance. And now we actually want to deploy this API, or not deploy because it's already deployed behind the gateway, but make it available to other developers. This could be developers that are internal to the org or even external developers. So of course, that is going to be done through the developer portal. Now, it's a lot to cover here because we have a new developer portal in beta, as we can see here. So let's take just a quick look at what we have for our portal currently. So I have a public portal set up here, which means I can see all these pages without being authenticated. I'll touch a little bit more on access control, but the short story is it's super flexible. Basically, on each page and individual API, you can set different access controls. So you could have a public home landing page, but then to actually see APIs, you could require folks to log in. And I'll show how easy that is to set up. So we have this nice home page that's all customized, got Kong colors, Kong logos, even a Kong favicon up here at the top of my tab. We can go into details on this Get Started guide that's built out, talking about discovering APIs inside the catalog, explaining where the documentation is. And again, this will support self-service access if you want to enable it, where developers can actually come here and subscribe to APIs to, generate those authentication tokens for them. Now, if I try to take a look at the API catalog, we don't actually have any APIs in this portal yet. And that's because I want to show how easy it is to actually publish an API inside the new portal. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to our APIs beta. We're going to go ahead and create a new API. Let's go ahead and we're just going to upload it by a spec. So I'm going to take that same open API spec for the payment processing API. And we're going to go ahead and create that. So we have our new API now. And I would also like to associate it with our existing gateway service. So let's go to our payments team and let's get our processing service and now associate it. And just like that, now it's associated. We can see our routes here. And so from my perspective, okay, now let's actually publish this. It looks good to go to me. So let's go to the home page here. Let's go ahead and publish this API. Now I can push it to one or more portals. I only have one portal, so we're going to put it in Mike's portal here. Now, if I wanted to do all the self-service subscription access, I could set up different authentication strategies here. I only have 2 options because I have the portal set up in the background, but other options are supported as well. But I'm going to do no auth, and I'm going to make the API publicly visible just for timing purposes on the demo today. So let's go ahead and publish that. And let's jump back and refresh our portal. All right, looks like I did everything correct. And we see our new API in here. And so let's open this up. Now, there's a lot of stuff I can add here. I can add custom documentations, getting started guides, walkthroughs, whatever I want that to look like. But since I only uploaded a spec, automatically you can see Kong's brand new spec renderer here, which looks pretty awesome. So I can see the different endpoints in the sidebar. It's going to support, the server construct inside of the open API spec, or even allow you to add custom URLs. And this will allow you to try it out both in the UI here directly, or also export it straight to Insomnia if you want to do more detailed testing inside of the tool. Now, this won't actually work now because I'm in my browser and I can actually reach the gateway that's running locally. But this is normally functional if you have a gateway deployed publicly that the developer portal can access. And of course, have all the course issues sorted out. But yeah, so this is just a kind of brief overview of what the new spec renderer looks like. Of course, I can come here and add path parameters for this particular request. And then I can export to different client libraries. So if I want to use this API inside of a Python script or application, I can export that directly from the spec render inside of the developer portal. Now, the other thing I want to touch on with the dev portal is how we actually got here. So in a lot of ways, this looks quite a bit like a custom portal. Again, I have a logo, I have this home page, I have all this getting started documentation with some relatively complex formatting going on. But I want to show you how easy it was to actually make this. So if we jump back into Konnect, we go to our portals, go to the new beta portal, open this guy up. And let's take a brief look at the portal editor inside of here. So this is a new built-in portal editor inside of Konnect. And it's basically a combination of Markdown and a framework called Markdown Components, which is a view-based framework if you're familiar with it. If not, that's totally fine too, because it is incredibly easy to use. Now, this might look like a lot of syntax up front, but if you have any familiarity with some basic CSS, as well as some Markdown, it does not take long at all to pick up. Basically, you have these different components. Properties for that components are inside of this little YAML structure here. And then you can nest components as well. So basically, everything we see up here on the top part here in this live preview is just these couple of components here. So again, we have the overall page section. We have our hero image here, and then we can see where we applied the title. So I can edit this in real time. So if I add that edit in, we can see that pop up in the preview. And then we can also see, the button that we have here to go to the getting started page. So again, there's a lot of really cool stuff here. We have a lot of different built-in components. So if I show some of these, we can see all these components. These all link out to the docs if you're unfamiliar with them. That will explain how these work. So again, super, super easy to pick up. And there's a lot of different things, like you can add table of contents. You can add different sidebars. And another cool thing I want to touch on is this concept of reusable snippets. So let's go ahead and discard those changes. So if we look at our snippet, we have this downtime message here. And so a snippet is just something you might want to reuse on multiple pages. So we have this downtime message, and we want to incite panic in this case. And so we're going to go and tell folks all services are down. And we're going to, as is tradition, blame this one on Alex. So if I want to push this on pages now, if I go into one of these, I go to the home page. Let's say I want to add that in. So there's a snippet component here, and then I just need to provide the name. And again, we have all this nice autocomplete inside of the editor. And just adding that in, we can see that is now at the top of the page. And maybe I want to add this in. Let's go ahead and save that change. Let's go ahead and add that in on the getting started page as well, and go ahead and save that change. Now, of course, I had to do the work of going and seeding in the snippet inside of each page. But once it is pre-seeded, what's really powerful about these is, okay, when the services hopefully come back on quite soon, obviously I want to remove the snippet. But if I have a lot more pages for a more complex portal, I don't want to go remove all these snippets. But it's as easy as coming back to the snippet here, and I can actually make the snippet private now, essentially unpublish it. And so now if I go back to my pages, even though that snippet is still inside of here, because it is not published, we see that it is no longer live on any of our pages. So it's as easy as that to apply configuration like that across a multitude of pages. And just on that kind of publish and public versus private, you can see details on each individual page here. This is also how individual APIs you upload to the portal work as well. And so RBAC is not, just all or nothing, as in do you want to support logins or not? It's very granular. So again, you can have private pages for internal developers and private APIs, and still have a public landing page, assuming that you do have some kind of external developer traffic. Okay, so I think we covered quite a bit there, at least a lot of the high-level strokes here of what you would want inside of a platform. But as Alex mentioned back at the beginning, a kind of core tenet and a major way to achieve automation, which again, we'll have a more detailed video on this once we cut it down some to actually fit inside the LinkedIn limits. But we need some type of approach to automation here. So what I want to show now is how basically all the steps I just did manually through ClickOps can also be done through automation. And again, everything I did now, if I made any mistakes here, it's very error prone. If there is a mistake, it's not very auditable. It's hard to know when that mistake occurred, who's responsible for it, and how to roll things back. You really don't want to be taking a ClickOps approach long-term inside production environments. So let's go ahead and do this all through automation. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to roll this back to the starting state. So you can see here, I just deleted all the stuff that I created manually just by using this preset deck state file I had. And just so folks believe me, I will show them now. We are back to how things started, which is a single service and just a couple of plugins. And just to reinforce that point, if I go and try to send a couple requests here now, we're actually going to get a 404 on both of these endpoints because this service does not exist inside of Konnect anymore. We just deleted all of that by running that deck command. So now I want to show what an automated pipeline could look like. So we're going to go over here and we're going to use GitHub Actions for our demo today. And so I have this pre-built automation pipeline just to walk through things real quick. If you're familiar here with GitHub Actions, it's quite simple. Basically, I'm going to install two CLI tools, Deck in the INSO CLI. Now, the first thing I'll do is actually back up the existing configuration. So if there are any issues, we have an easy way to roll back. Then I'm going to come in here. I'm going to lint the spec. So if there's been any changes to the spec, again, if you're taking like a design first approach, you add a new endpoint, maybe there's some issues, some linting rules weren't followed. We want to check that every time this pipeline runs. Then just like I did last time manually, we want to convert it to Kong configuration. We want to add tags and control planes so we target the right part of the platform. Then I want to come in here. I want to add plugins. So that would be our rate limiting and our key off. We want to go and add any existing consumers and then go ahead and apply that configuration. Now we have one additional step because if any of these steps fail, we want to be able to roll back to existing configuration. So to see what this looks like in real time, let's see if this all works out. We're going to run this job. Let's jump back. Take a quick look at this workflow while it's running here, hopefully in real time. All right, so installing Deck, installing Insomnia, backing up our config, linting the spec, that is all passing, adding our plugins and consumers, and going ahead and pushing that to our gateway. So let's jump back into Konnect and refresh the page. And just like that, we have pushed in our plugins. Our consumer, our Nick Cage consumer is back. We have our routes and we have our underlying base processing service. And if I go back and run those same Insomnia API requests, everything is fully functional. We're getting 200s again. Again, I didn't even have to come in here and update the API key because in this case, I actually coded into the deck state file. And so we're authorized again, and these endpoints are up and running. Now, just to show the other case in kind of the beauty of declarative automation, let's go ahead and say we actually did make a modification to the spec. Everyone use your imagination here a little bit, but let's say I added in a new endpoint, but the linting rules were broken, and for some reason it wasn't caught, inside of your IDE of choice. And this goes ahead and gets pushed to our automation pipeline. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and break that spec temporarily as our example. and let's push that inside of our repo. Now, of course, if you've worked with automation pipelines before, I'm manually running these, but there's a lot of different ways you can actually trigger an automation pipeline. One of those that's quite common is, if a new commit comes into your main branch, and let's make sure that this commit is coming in. So we can see, yes, this new commit has come in. I could have that trigger our automation pipeline, but for demo purposes today, I'm just going to trigger it manually one more time. So let's go ahead and run our workflow, and let's see what happens this time. Hopefully we get a different result, because that lint job should hopefully fail here. All right, so back up our config, and there we go. So it did not pass the linting rules we had set, which again are just basic ones, but you can also have custom linting rules set up here for your organization. And immediately it is going to back out those changes on failure. So it went back to our initial state. Now, what I should have done here is actually reset things to show you. So let's actually do that real quick. So let's push this to our initial state again. Okay, let's delete all of that, refresh. Okay, so we're back in our initial state. Now let's run this automation pipeline one more time that we'd actually use to push in our new config. So let's run this job one more time. So now we're basically trying to add that processing service, just like I did manually at the beginning of this quite long demo here. And so now when this lint fails again, so we can actually see when we had the backup file here, we can see that was created. Okay, the lint failed. And now we basically have gone through and reapplied that. And so again, there's no issues here with us getting stuck in some kind of in-between state, which could happen with an imperative automation flow. We backed up starting our initial state. We hit an error at some point in the pipeline, and we reverted to that state. So now we could have somebody come in, people are notified. Let's take a closer look at what went wrong. Let's fix the spec and then run that pipeline again. And I think with that,
we're
over time.
20 minutes over time. That's okay, because people are still hanging on, so no worries. Yeah, so we just showed what it looks like in Konnect to do literally everything: build, run, discover, govern. Even though we're late, we covered that in 25 minutes. So you can see basically you can go in there and in 25, 30 minutes, you're all set up. So pretty sweet. There are a few questions that we answered throughout the live stream. Once again, if you have any other ones, just put them in the comments, and we'll answer them over the next few days as things come in, because this will stay in your feed. But thanks, Mike. Thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you.
As just a sneak preview here, because we talked about at the beginning, this was kind of our vertical integration across a REST or a standard API.
Yes.
This is a sneak preview here. Again, I was working with more traditional APIs, but we also have support now, or coming soon for folks, for supporting Kafka, so event streaming. Kafka sample.
Coming soon. We just launched that this week.
Yeah, but it's still closed beta. Not everyone's gonna have access to this right away.
Yeah. Well, if you want access, come reach out, and I'll put the link to the early access program in the chat here in just a second. So I'll put it in the comments. So keep an eye on it.
Yeah, new control plane, new runtime for supporting Kafka, and then additionally, something else that is coming soon that is not in beta but coming in with new UI support is a dedicated AI manager. So I'm sure a lot of folks are already familiar with our AI gateway. But we're going to have a dedicated control plane type for managing all your different LLMs. So want to give a sneak preview of that. And again, that kind of reinforces the idea of all this Konnect functionality that you see, analytics, the portal, the service catalog, how we're managing and governing these different services are not going to be limited to just traditional APIs. So I want to make sure I called that out as well.
Yeah, no, it's a good call out. And Mike and I will be starting a new series on eventing, specifically leveraging the event gateway and the larger API platform now, not just for APIs, AI microservices, but also event stream. So it's definitely a good call out. Once again, I'll send a link to both the event gateway launch, the announcement blog, but also a link to a piece of documentation that covers a Konnect reference architecture. So if you want to basically go straight from no API platform to killer API platform almost immediately, check that out. We give you tools to make that happen really quick. Learn how the best are doing it in Konnect. And with that, we will let you all go. Once again, I know we're way over. We'll let you all go. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments, and we'll see you all soon. Bye, everybody.